Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.
Hi, everyone. I'm Artur, one of your hosts at Reimagine 2020. And with me, I have Danny Brown Wolf from Orbs. And without further ado, I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks. Danny, I'm based in California. I work at Orbs, which is a public blockchain for enterprise, a company that's based out of Tel Aviv in Israel. I'm head of partnerships and strategy, and we go around talking to governments and enterprise about how to best integrate blockchain and how to use it in a way that brings them value.
Got it. And tell me a bit about Orbs. So I understand it's similar to Ethereum, but there's some very, very kind of specific or distinct differences, right? For the purposes of for enterprises, right? Tell me a bit more about that.
So we actually started, our founders, they started as investors back in the day, but then when the Ethereum boom started, we're actually building applications on Ethereum for real existing companies. That's how we started back in the day. And in that process, we understood the limitations of Ethereum and the inherent design features that prohibit enterprise and governments and basically centralized organizations from really working with a public blockchain. So you have Ethereum and the Web3 other blockchains were designed with the thinking of DAOs and dApps in mind. So how do we create an application that's completely based on code and autonomous, and is usually the business logic is based on a token economy. So this new business model for this new world that is super exciting, right? Because it's a world that allows you to have decentralized marketplaces and cut the middleman and decentralized finance. So it's a really exciting world and model. But when you take real world companies who try to then use that technology to gain the benefits of a public permissionless blockchain, then you see that the certain design features that were made for the DAOs and dApps just simply are a no starter. They're no go. It's not going to happen. And we can get into those specific ones, but we saw there's this infrastructure gap here that needs to be filled in order to bring adoption today of existing companies. And I think most of these companies, what they've done, the available solution was starting to use private blockchains, which is not really blockchains. It's a DLT, decentralized ledger technology version that is based on some blockchain features. But we believe that it doesn't bring the inherent value and innovation of blockchain, which is this transparency, permissionlessness, third-party auditability. So we took upon ourselves to bridge that gap. Okay, how do we design an infrastructure that would allow enterprises, governments, and existing businesses to work on it while still having the benefits of a public blockchain?
Got it. So yeah, actually, two questions I'd like to ask about that, but I think the bigger one, first one would be so you mentioned that, so you are distinctively a public blockchain for enterprises, but I think one of the things that we've kind of heard is that enterprises have a hard time at first maybe understanding why they would need to, or why they would want to even use a public blockchain, right? Which is why so many of them have so many of the sort of enterprise blockchain solutions have gone down the private route, and well, sort of lessons are being learned, but yeah, maybe you could share a bit about that. Why should an enterprise choose a public blockchain?
So a lot of the times they don't use a public blockchain. They're either because they don't see the benefits, or they don't. There are certain features of a public blockchain that prohibit them from doing so. We'll start with the first one. How do we identify the value for them in a public blockchain? And that's just education and consulting, right? Because a lot of the times, if they don't understand what the benefits of a public blockchain is, then they build use cases that are not suited for blockchains at all. And a lot of the use cases we're seeing with enterprise blockchain, with built on private blockchains, we're saying you don't really need a blockchain for it at all. You're paying this huge premium because blockchain is always more expensive than a centralized solution. There's just duplicity inherent in it, even if you use a private blockchain. You can reach the same goals with centralized solution and open APIs. Okay? So it's really about working with them to identify what the use case that requires blockchain, and not just using blockchain for the sake of it. So that's a first sort of uphill battle, but the more they play around with the technology and the use cases, we are seeing an improvement in the way that they understand the value and understand why they would need a public blockchain for specific use cases, because some use cases don't need a public blockchain, but the ones that do need a public blockchain, because they require the value comes from the third party being able to either audit or not having to participate in the consensus but still get the same guarantees. So this building a digital trust system that would allow their partners and users to trust them and join it is one value. And the second one is an unprecedented network effect by having a public infrastructure. And we liken it to the open source movement. And I think this is what really gets them, because after a 20-year battle, they now understand the benefit of open source. And I think there was like over 60% of open source today actually comes from large companies.
And what are so I think use cases is the sort of, I think the most important sort of keyword here, right? And what are the most kind of interesting use cases or best examples of use cases that you guys have sort of seen or managed to achieve so far?
So I personally, I didn't mention, but my background is in government and policy before I came into this crazy blockchain world. I'm a big fan of government use cases, specifically because whereas with enterprises, it's a process where we tell them, we show them how building trust can be a competitive strategy. With governments, this trust is inherited. Like it's their job. It's their job to be transparent, and it's mandated by law. It's just that the processes by which they try to achieve this transparency and trust are rotten to the core, or from very outdated. So I think one of the most exciting use cases that's out there today is actually a pilot of the World Economic Forum that's working on public procurement model. So the OECD, there are a lot of reports on how public procurement and public bids in general, whether it's you're bidding on land or you're bidding for services, are the single biggest failure point for fraud with public funding of public funds. And a lot of it has to do with transparency and the lack of trust in the institutions that manage this. And that's where the corruption happens. And smart contracts and being able to run those bids on a smart contract, and for the bidders to interact directly with the smart contract, they get these guarantees that no one is looking at their bid and giving that number to their competitors, and that there's a transparency. No one's changing the bid in the middle to suit a specific vendor over another. I think it's a really interesting use case, and the World Economic Forum, they're publishing their paper on it in the next few weeks. That's a great one. On the enterprise side, And there are a lot of government examples. On the enterprise side, one of my favorite use cases is actually copyright management. So we started working with a news agency that looked at blockchain for copyrights on the internet. So copyrights on the internet is nearly impossible. Like they put up a picture. They have photographers from all over the world, and they sell it or give it to their partners, which are other news outlets, and they have no way of making sure that they're used in the proper way. There's no way to track it. And then you're talking about social media and copyright violations. Blockchain being having a public blockchain having the property of a ledger that's sort of like a source of truth that anyone can plug into without hard integration is a perfect solution for it. So we worked on that solution, and while we were doing it, we started discovering just how much you can do with that data. So taking a photo and hashing the photo with metadata that originally were like, okay, what's the copyright metadata? That's exciting because it solved the immediate problem, but it opened this world of possibilities that all of a sudden we're like, okay, this actually helps with fake news. Because the internet, one of the biggest problems of fake news is misuse of real pictures. So there's a picture of something that happened in 2011 from a riot, and someone's posting it and saying, "Oh yeah, this is yesterday
right
from Wuhan, right? Like the China, there's a rebellion in China." How do you give tools to the audience of social media to have this digital literacy that you can help them identify what is real, what isn't, and what is the source of things? So I'm sorry, there are sirens around.
No worries at all.
So we're next to Stanford Hospital here. It's gone. So the growing problems with fake news is deep fakes and taking a real video, editing it, cutting it. The AI solution, which is the most prominent one now that is being used to tackle fake news, is problematic inherently because it's kind of a race to the bottom. Because you have, the people who are creating the deep fakes doing an algorithm, the opposing algorithm is identifying these, and then they just improve their algorithm, and it's a race to the bottom. And the question is, who has more resources? And I think we can instinctively answer that usually the bad actors have more resources in this field. With blockchain, the solution is completely different. It's about it's about allowing authentication of the photo at its source. So if you think about Twitter and the check mark, the blue check mark that gives you this tool to understand, yes, this is a real person that is who they say it is, and it was verified in some way that I trust. What if you can extend that blue check mark also to the content that comes out of these? So if the Trump account publishes a video and it carries the blue check mark and is registered, and in its original version is registered and hashed on the blockchain. Now that video, because it's a public blockchain, anything can connect to it. I can see it on a blog post and somewhere else, and it doesn't matter what they say to me. The question is that blue check carried, or was it edited or manipulated in some way? And I can always refer back to this blockchain source of truth with very easy tools and say, okay, maybe it was edited in a non-malicious way. Maybe they just cut it to make it shorter, right? But I have the ability to go back to the original, being referred to the original.
Got it. I mean, like, honestly, like this was, given what an increasing problem the sort of like fake news and deep fakes and so on are, like it would be, like this sort of thing would technically would be the sort of the perfect solution to showcase the sort of potential of blockchain, right, to the world. But where are we in terms of, so this, like you said, that it's a very high potential use case, but where does it stand in terms of its sort of stages of development, or sort of what does it take to sort of when can we kind of, I guess, expect this?
There are a lot of startups working on similar things. There are a lot of the New York Times is working on something those on a private blockchain. So there are a few problems with that. But I'm guessing the next 2 years we'll definitely see these use cases are in production and giving value to end users.
Which is still, I mean, it's a relatively short time, right? Given the size and the extent of the problem, right? Like, you can't change the world in like 3 months, like,
Yeah, ideally you'd have the big players who are saying that they care about health of the internet, like Twitter and Facebook, adopting these tools. And there's always for us, there's always a thinking of, okay, either what's the commercial value that they can gain from it, because that would accelerate adoption, or is there a certain regulation that requires them to do it, and blockchain is the best way to accommodate the regulation. So with copyrights, Australia and the European Union have made changes to their copyrights law in the past year that would definitely have repercussions that accelerate such solutions. And if it's not commercial value or regulation, then it's just if there's a big shitstorm. And I think with the US election coming up, the stakes are higher.
For sure, definitely. And so taking it sort of going back to the enterprises side. So you've gone out and spoken to and work with so many different enterprises and managed to sort of I guess not only convince them on blockchain but also convince them on public blockchain. But what's the sentiment right now generally, the sort of like the perception or sentiment on blockchain, and how has it changed? What kind of trend do you notice?
Yeah. So with enterprises, the trend is very positive. There was I think it was a McKinsey survey that surveyed the Fortune 500 CTOs and CIOs, and over 50% of them said that blockchain is strategic. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I can send it to you. But an overwhelming amount said they're looking to spend about over $5 million on blockchain in the next few years. The LinkedIn survey a few months back of job search said that blockchain and AI were the two prime skills that the job for jobs today. So you definitely, and a lot of it is driven by enterprise, definitely. So this is showing you that they're looking at it in a strategic way. A lot of things are happening that are not announced yet because they're in the piloting stage. But when those pilots mature into production, that's where we're going to hear about it more. So there is a very positive sentiment.
Got it. And I think one of the trends that I've sort of like subjectively noticed is that they're like now, because it also it always comes in waves, and now there seems to be that there's like a slight decrease in the amount of sort of like blockchain kind of pilots being done or publicly announced, or I'm not sure whether it's just that these are actually things that companies realize that it's more important to actually do the work and not announce them. Like I think like a lot of these sort of many consortiums and so on were sort of we're doing, right? So is this this is just like something that sort of that seems to be, or is it actually that there's a lot more sort of like pilots being worked on and companies have just realized that it's time to actually really work on it? It doesn't matter if you announce it or not.
I think serious companies in general, they usually don't announce pilots until the pilot's done and they actually have data on the successfulness of the pilot. And with enterprise, those take a long time. And on the other hand, there was I think a media fatigue with announcements of things that don't exist yet. I mean, us personally, like we don't like to announce things unless they're working. So announcing that you signed an an MOU about a future project, nobody cares, and it as it should be.
And yeah, for sure, I completely agree. So just for like the audience to like to understand, what is the normal kind of like timeline for example, for you, like going like identifying and going in and speaking to a company to like to getting to a proof, like identifying a proof of concept or a pilot, and then what are the sort of like steps, and how long does it usually is it expected to take?
With enterprise, the sales cycle and the work cycle is 6 months to a year. There's a long cycles. With governments, it could be even more unless they have a specific public bid requesting assistance for it. So yeah, those are long cycles. That's why I think in parallel to working directly with clients and on their specific needs, we also develop use cases in-house that we believe there's value in.
Tell me a bit more about these. What are the sort of the most interesting ones? I know there's something about CryptoKitties, right?
CryptoKitties. That's not. I mean, there are a lot of projects happening in the community, in the blockchain community, and I think in the more Web3 Ethereum community, there's a lot of work being done and things being built that have to do with decentralized finance. So taking the existing financial world and making it permissionless, which is exciting because it allows for access to a lot of people around the world who may not have a bank account in Bank of America that offers them trading services. So there's a lot of work being done there. Orbs specifically as a technology is optimized for smart contracts and more the enterprise use cases and less the financial money transaction use cases. So that's what we focus on. CryptoKitties it's like a token project for the blockchain community because it was the first kind of game on Ethereum that was super popular. But even more than that, and we have a very interesting relationship with the consequences of CryptoKitties. It was so popular, and this is late 2017. CryptoKitties was so popular that it kind of broke Ethereum. It slowed it down tremendously, and the gas charges on Ethereum spiked to like $1 a transaction, and it really manifested a lot of the problems with the Ethereum design for these enterprises. And at the time, we were working on applications on Ethereum, and that was really the birthplace of Orbs, because we understood, okay, clearly these are the limitations of Ethereum, and now we need to build something else that doesn't compete for the same use cases, competes for different use cases, for high transaction volume, etc. So CryptoKitties always has a special place in our history.
Got it. And I guess like this is actually it's like CryptoKitties, it's a great example of like what stops an enterprise, or it's just a deal breaker, right? Like for an enterprise, like you bring your business onto the blockchain, and then essentially but you're putting it into an environment where like some sort of things are moving so fast that basically an overnight success app can essentially also render like your infrastructure not working anymore suddenly. So, and
Ethereum and a lot of the Web3 blockchains are inherently shared infrastructure. And the reason why they do that is because their token, it pays for gas. So it has to be shared. And the concept is that they're all eventually going to be interconnected and with the tokens, etc. Orbs was built mimicking the maybe AWS sort of a cloud infrastructure for an inherently sharded or an inherently isolated environment. So just like on AWS, Netflix and Expedia both work with AWS cloud services, and a spike on Expedia will not cause a slowdown for Netflix. So that's how we designed using, we call it blockchain virtualization. So each app gets a virtualized environment that's isolated from the other application. So that's there are architectural ways to solve a lot of these problems. It's not that's the problems of blockchain. That those are specific design problems of specific blockchains. And for enterprises that have different requirements, you need to build a different one.
Got it. And so like this is obviously one like very big gap for Ethereum, right? Which you mentioned earlier that there's multiple of them. What are the sort of like the other gaps with Ethereum that Orbs fills, especially for the enterprises?
I think the fee model is one of the biggest ones. So on Ethereum, the end user pays the fees and pays them with the transaction. I mean, that would be like Facebook asking you every time you send a message, attach a few cents to that message, because that's our cloud server. That's how much our cloud costs to send that message for processing. What would the usability be on that? Oh, but not only that, it's not any money that you have. Like you need specific token, and go find that token. Never gonna happen. Like that. It makes it very hard, and there are a lot of interesting projects built on Ethereum as tools to try to give solutions for it. But that's an inherent problem for user applications. For enterprise, it's even more because the lack of isolation causes a diseconomy of scale, because all the applications are fighting for the same resources. So if you come to an enterprise and the CTO and the CIO, they love the use case, and you're like, okay, let's work on it. And then you get to the CFO, and the CFO asks you, okay, well, how much is this going to cost me to use this infrastructure? I know how much my AWS cloud service costs me. How much are you going to cost me? And with Ethereum, you'd have to say, well, we don't really know, because it's per transaction as opposed to a set amount, like a subscription model. And the more you use it, the more expensive it gets, which is complete opposite to any other infrastructure that's being used. That the more you use it, the cheaper it should be. But not only that, the more others use it, the more expensive it will get for you. And at that point, the CFO will show you the door, because no enterprise can work with such a model. It's just not something that they understand or can budget in any way. So the fee model was definitely a big one. And I would say another feature of that is very important for.
And how does Orbs? How does Orbs solve the fee model? Does it give the customer flexibility, or does it always put it on the enterprise side? Yeah.
So the isolation allows us to have it as a governance decision of the application. So the application pays for the subscription, just like AWS. This is how much bandwidth we need. This is how much storage we need, and they pay that in for the month. If they want to charge their users later, up to them. Where the infrastructure, Orbs doesn't dictate to them how to interact with their users. That's on them. So that's how we solve it on Orbs. Another big one that enterprises have a problem with is this lack of control. So with Ethereum and on the one hand, and the private blockchains like Hyperledger on the other side of the equation, it's kind of like a 0 or 1. There's nothing in between. And enterprises don't work that way. Like we're not going to even if we understand the value of a public blockchain, and that's where the innovation is, and that's where the value is even for our use case, there's nowhere we're going to go from 0 to 1. We need a process. We need to be able to decentralize slowly and relinquish control slowly of our data and of our processing. So we created a two-tiered consensus that's getting really technical, but at the end of the day, it allows for a governance decision at the application level that the block producers, the blocks, the validators or nodes or miners who write the transactions into the block, there are different levels that they can the application can control who they are. So let's say they want a consortium of companies that are the ones who write the transactions in the data into the block. But on Orbs, the public aspect that gives the guarantees of a public blockchain is that the permissionless validator pool that's based on proof of stake consensus, they're the ones who approve the blocks and add them to the chain. So you can think of it like a hybrid model. We allow for a hybrid model of private public in terms of the controls. In order to allow them, we see the future is completely public, but we see it as a transition and designed the infrastructure to allow for it to be a transition as opposed to 0-1.
Got it. And I guess, how does the process usually go around? Like, let's say, because obviously for a company for an enterprise to embark on this, they need to, I guess, like fully understand the sort of the technology itself. And what are the sort of like the lessons that you've learned around kind of, let's say, like explaining a two-tiered consensus mechanism to a company that right now is used to having we use three services from AWS and they cost $68,000 a month.
I think one of the methods we developed internally, it's been very helpful to work with clients, is on-site workshops. So we'll tell the client, listen, this is a new interesting technology. We want you to understand it before we embark on how to use it and building the use case. So we'll bring our brilliant chief architect and someone from business or tech engagement, and we'll do on-site with whoever you need, like the VP R&D, the administration, and even the engineers. And let us show you how easy it is easy to work with. And as a technology, it's not like a complicated, scary technology that no one can do. And give you tools to be able to evaluate yourself where the value is, how hard it's going to be to build it, to maintain it, etc. So those on-site workshops for education purposes mainly, and then the next step would be on-site workshop to actually build a prototype or work on the use case. They've been an incredible tool to work with enterprise. And
I guess in some sense, you sort of with the first with the first workshop, when you get your foot in the door, then you're also sort of potentially kind of like planting the seed or sort of converting a couple of the people within the organization that this exists, because I think
they become true believers after the workshop. Yeah.
And I think like one of the problems is just the issue around like education, that okay, now people know sort of that blockchain that it exists, right? They don't really, so, and like some people know, let's say like, people working on the innovation, arms and so on in larger enterprises, they also know what it is. But again, there's still like a massive like educational gap or knowledge gap, or like, how can you exactly like, use it? There's still like just like such a long way to go, right?
And it's even more than that, because sometimes you need to do a bit of a correction. Because a lot of those enterprises, their instinct when they are thinking about a blockchain solution is to go to the large consulting firms or the large system integrators. A lot of those system integrators have a product that they're trying to sell that's a private DLT, that's a private blockchain. So the education that they've received originally around blockchain is based on someone trying to sell a DLT solution to them. So I think there has been a lot of progress here. also. And I think EY, Ernst & Young, is really leading the way on advocating for the benefits of a public blockchain, and they should really be praised for it.
I think that they're building on, or the one they've chosen is Ethereum right now, right?
They're true believers of Ethereum, and they're really pushing the Ethereum both community and industry really far, and it limits the use cases that they can do, which is why they're focused more on use cases for the financial sector, because that's what Ethereum is good for. But it's the work that they're doing explaining the value of a permissionless public blockchain is incredible.
Yeah, we actually had in another talk as well, Paul Brody from EY, talking about the sort of like the work that they've done, but also like what was the process around kind of understanding that there's no that big of a point to use a private blockchain. Like, it's just kind of how it defeats the purpose, and how it like internally with their clients, it's sort of what the process kind of was, but also the steps they've taken, that they try to kind of embrace the sort of the general mindset of the blockchain movement around open sourcing things and sharing what they've actually built, which is, it's not exactly in the DNA of consultancy firms to sort of to share what they've done. They're
very excited. They're open source is it's the benefit of blockchain. So I build a blockchain solution. It would be funny to have it not as open source. It's blockchain inherently as a technology is open source on speed, because it's not only sharing the source code, but also the live code, also the data and the live instance. Exactly. That's what gives you all these guarantees and possibilities that are endless.
Got it. But I guess there is this sort of it's an inherent uphill battle, because large enterprises, they're always and EY is the standout kind of consulting firm in this case, but large enterprises, they are kind of, it's very easy for them to for all of their sort of vendor needs to go to the same provider that's been serving them for 25 years, and the IBMs of the world and so on, right? But do you see, and in this case, these are the companies that I guess Orbs is claiming, or sort of is saying that that their sort of fundamental approach is wrong around preferring private blockchains. Are you seeing any sort of shift there? Because I think there has been a sort of or I guess the sort of the general sentiment is that there's a lot of private enterprise blockchain solutions that have been built, raised a lot of money and so on, but they haven't sort of managed to kind of materialize or achieve close to the traction that at the end of the day, we're
talking about enterprise that they have a bottom line. The bottom line is, this is how much money I invested in this solution and how much it's going to cost me. Because also private blockchains, beyond not having the same value, they end up being a lot more expensive, because you're babysitting nodes, you're running nodes by yourself, or letting the consultancies run nodes for you for a premium price. You have lock-ins, which means you can't pick up and go to another solutions. And that's on top of the cost. And then, okay, what is the benefit I get from it? And the benefit of private, unless it's a huge consortium, but that doesn't require everyone to participate in the consensus, then I'm paying a lot of money and I'm not getting a lot of value. So yeah, it's a process that takes a year or two, but they all go through that process. And if they don't get the value, but they still believe in the use case, then they'll try to look for alternative. And that's where we are, I think, in the cycle.
So would you say that are you seeing that the sort of the trend, or it's starting to sort of more or less become clear that public blockchain is the way to go, that the sort of the promise of private blockchain, enterprise blockchains, just has most likely won't be met.
I think even the ones who are advocating for private blockchains are saying that public is the future. It's just that there's a lot of infrastructure around it that doesn't exist yet. So a lot of, if you don't have the ability to do decentralized identity verification for vendors, or decentralized insurance proofs for it, like there are a lot of missing pieces in the public world, beyond what I talked about in terms of usability of, you know, paying gas and the business models. So those will be solved eventually in one way or another. Just like the scalability problem is solved in different problems, whether it's state channels or any other second layers or improvements in the core. So as the infrastructure of public blockchain advances, I think everyone in the business understand that that's the future. They're just not necessarily ready for it. But they do understand that it's the future, which is a really good first step.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And I guess like it's kind of like you said as well, that like when we started this talk, that you know, like Ethereum and the sort of the kind of the big name, the sort of like the fancy shiny protocols, they're all built for this sort of already decentralized world where, like, you know, we have, you know, machines talking to machines, purchasing things from machines and so on. But, like, you know, it's not 2040 yet, right? Like, you know, it's
well, also, I mean, even
there needs to be something like a bridge in between.
The best example I can give is the, you know, there were like 5 or 10 companies working on decentralized Uber, okay? Because they're saying, cut the middleman. It makes sense. Like, why not have a code that serves as the marketplace between drivers and users, right? It makes sense. And a lot of them raised money to build it. But okay, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for today's world, because how do you vet drive? Like, you don't have decentralized identity verification. You don't know if a driver is a serial killer, it has a criminal record. So those are the components that you're missing in order to build that world.
And it's also sort of, I think it's also like slightly sort of like silly to like, you know, cut out the middleman in a business where, like, Uber's kind of, a lot of their innovation or success was from actually already cutting out a middleman, right? Sort of like aggregating a much larger market.
There's always room for improvement.
Definitely.
Especially if there's a trust problem, right? If they're
for sure. And I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah,
left.
I have a hard stop.
Sure. So maybe just my last question to you would be, so it's the couple thousand students listening today and sort of and thinking about a potential career in blockchain. So whether it's computer science majors, law school or business school, what would your kind of general advice be to them?
So I mean, my background is in policy, and I did this crazy pivot into this crazy world. And because it's a new industry, I think there isn't yet a power hierarchy in place. So if you're good, it's a place where you can move up really, really quickly. So if it's something that interests you, then I'd say go for it now and not in 10 years when it's already an established industry.
Got it. That's very well put. I think this has been very much the sort of the general trend of what the advice has been, is that I think it falls into the same sort of bucket, is that, like, it's great, like, you know, as a young person, you should take risk, and this is just an industry which has a great risk profile.
Yeah.
That it's just like, you know, you can afford to lose, but in this case, what you can win is just so tremendously, you know, fulfilling and fun, and you know, great.
And we all wear, you know, t-shirts all day long.
Exactly. But thank you so much for your time. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure everyone's learned quite a lot about Orbs, as well as sort of how enterprises view blockchain generally.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain education and technological development all around the world. Reimagine 2020.